endlessly searching for an original sin.
Hey guys, welcome back to more Sweet Pool. We had quite a bit of a revelation last time, and then I pressed the wrong button. So what's going to happen? Monday morning was humid, with a sheet of thick clouds covering the sky. Idly wondering if this was what the Amazon rainforest felt like, Yuji headed to school. His condition had remained stable over the weekend, so he'd worked all through Saturday and Sunday. His weekend had gone by in a flash. Still, it had been quite some time since he'd worked a full shift, and he felt a strong sense of accomplishment and pride. Arriving at the classroom, Yuji walked to his desk and took a seat. The room was noisy as ever. Out of habit, Yuji glanced toward the windows. Tetsuo was already sitting at his desk, resting his chin on his hand as he gazed outside. He always seemed to arrive before Yuji. Personality and appearance aside, he was practically a model student. Per their agreement, Yuji had been going to his house again after school today. Frankly, he wasn't sure how to feel about that. He recalled how Tetsuo had looked sleeping on his shoulder, and his heart skipped a beat. Somehow, it felt like he'd dreamed the whole thing. He looked away before his thoughts could go any further down that hole. Just then, the door slid open with a bang, and a cheerful voice called out, "Hiya!" Grinning from ear to ear, Makoto strolled into the classroom, his hand lifted in a wave as he greeted each classmate he passed. It was a relief to see him back to normal self after his bizarre behavior last week. Spotting Yuji, Makoto set his book bag down on his chair, then walked over.
"や、おはよう、幼児。
おはよう。
最近調子いいみたいじゃん。
ああ、だいぶ。
そっか、ならよかった。
Makoto grinned, then furrowed his brow apologetically.
この間、ごめんな。
え？
お前ん家まで行った時のこと、俺、ちょっとおかしくなっててさ。
ああ。
The image of Makoto soaked from the rain flickered through his mind.
気にしてない。そっちこそ風邪とかひかなかったか？
全然、元気だけが取り柄だし。でも、本当ごめんな。
He clasped his hands together in front of his face and gestured a gesture of contrition?
どうした？
あ、いや。
そういやさ、神谷から伝言なんだけど、放課後、科学室に来てくれってさ。なんか話があるって。
わかった。
じゃ、確かに伝えたってことで。
Makoto turned and practically skipped back to his seat. Yuji watched him go, wondering at the disquiet he felt in his stomach. Something was off about Makoto just now. Not his tone or his attitude or his expression. Those had all been normal. It was his eyes. His smile hadn't reached his eyes. Or was Yuji overthinking it? Before he could decide, the morning hymn began to play over the speakers. After school, Yuji headed to the chemistry lab as instructed. The basement hallway was pleasantly cool, even chilly, a refreshing escape from humidity. Passing through the dimly lit corridor, Yuji soon arrived at the chemistry lab. The lights were off. He must be early. In that case, the door was probably locked. But when he tested his theory, to his surprise, the door slid open. No one was inside. Had Kamiya forgotten to lock the door? Or had he simply stepped away for a minute? The chemistry lab was even colder than the hallway. Goosebumps rose in his arms as he stepped inside. For a moment, he wondered if a window had been left open. But no, they were all closed. Why was it so cold? For now, he decided he would wait for Kamiya. But just as he stepped toward one of the lab tables, he heard the door lock behind him. Startled, he heard the door lock. Okay, startled, he started to turn, but too late. Someone grabbed him under the shoulders.
やめろ話せよ
Yuji struggled, but his assailant leaned their weight against him, pinning his arms in place. Unable to support their combined weight, Yuji staggered forward, slamming his gut into the edge of the table. The attacker forced his head down onto the table. His skull met the hard resin surface with a thud. Head throbbing, he tried to push himself up, but the attacker grabbed a fistful of his hair. A tearing pain shot through his scalp. Then he heard a clicking in his ear, and the next thing he knew, his assailant was waving something in front of his eyes. Soon he registered what it was, and blood drained from his face. A box cutter. Its blade glinted blue in the dim light of the classroom.
誰だ
Makoto has gone full-on insanity. There was no mistaking that voice.
誠
当たり大正解嬉しい
It was Makoto. His pupils seemed abnormally lodged in the darkness.
目をそらすなよ
No means no. Holding the box cutter at Yuji's throat, Makoto tugged on his shoulder. Roll over. Bitterly, Yuji obeyed. Next, Makoto used his free hand to pin Yuji's hands above his head, a faint smile playing in his lips as he gazed down at his captive.
どけよ誠何やってるんだよ
Forcing down his growing panic, Yuji spoke in a faint whisper. Makoto chuckled low in his throat.
何やってるって言われても俺もよくわかんねえも
The lab was freezing cold, yet Makoto's forehead was pearled in sweat.
神谷が来る
ん来ねえよあれ嘘だもん幼児を呼び出すための嘘そうでもしないと来てくれないかなって思って
His lips twisted into a sneer.
そんな神谷
Kamir just gives it to anybody.
あんなの鍵しまっとくとこに引っかかってるだけだし誰だって持ち出せるよそれよりさずっと幼児に聞きたいことあってこうやって時間作ったんだけど
Makoto clearly wasn't rational. Just when Yuji thought he'd gone back to normal, that must have been an act.
聞いてもいい
Not wanting to provoke him, Yuji nodded slightly.
幼児さ白沼のことどう思ってんの
白沼
What did he have to do with this? Then the box cutter touched his throat, and Yuji flinched at the chill of its blade.
だってさあいつ幼児ん家に行ったりしてさしかも2日連続で
How did Makoto know about that?
頼んだのは神谷だけどさあいつもなんで断らないわけ後ろついてってる間さなんつうかもう気狂いそうってこういうこと言うんだなって思った気になって気になって気になって気になって気になって
後をつけたのか。
だから気狂いそうだったんだってば。しょうがないじゃん。
Yuji stared at Makoto in blank disbelief. He stalked Tetsuo?
でさ、白沼さ、2回目の時になんか変な袋をドアんとこに引っ掛けたりしてさ、そういうのって気味悪くね？だっこ。
Oops, I didn't mean to skip that. He'd certainly found it all right. A plastic container full of Tetsuo's mother's homemade stew. This would explain the loud noise he heard prior to the discovery of the spill.
ほんとあいつ何なんだよ。俺思うんだけどさ、白沼がちょっかい出すようになってからだよな、幼児がおかしくなったのって。あいつのせいでなんかいろいろ狂っちまった。いろんなことがおかしくなった。
Makoto's expression hardened, and he lowered his gaze to the box cutter in his hand. Yuji heard the blade extend slowly against his throat. Desperately, he fought to keep his breathing level.
なあ、幼児。本当はさ、あいつのこと嫌なんだよな。嫌で嫌でたまんないんだよな。何考えてるかわかんねえし、雰囲気怖えし。
Sir, you're going insane.
絶対さ、おかしいんだって。ダメだよ。幼児、ダメなんだよ。
Makoto's eyes slowly met his.
あんな奴より、幼児は俺と一緒にいた方が絶対にいいんだよ。そうに決まってる。ねえ、幼児もそう思うだろう。
Makoto, it's not you, it's me. I need my space. I gotta think things through. You're a great guy, yada yada yada. Get the box cutter away from my neck or I'm kicking you in the balls. That's a lot of things we could say right now. Yuji could tell that Makoto wasn't seeing him. Not really. His eyes were empty, like glass marbles.
もうイライラするな。すっげえイラつく。ふざけてんの？
He cracked his neck with an audible pop. His tone implied barely suppressed fury.
何分考え込んでんだよ。今すぐ答えろ。早く早く、どっちなのか言え。
Suddenly, Makoto raised the box cutter high. Yuji managed to pull one of his hands free, just in time to intercept the descending blade. Searing pain shot down his arm, followed by a wet warmth spreading from his palm.
答えて。よし。俺か、白沼か。俺ならうなずいて。白沼ならそのまま。
I really doubt he's gonna nod his head, dude. Makoto's soft whisper tickled his ear as the box cutter loomed before his eyes. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Makoto had completely lost it. There was no telling what might happen if Yuji didn't play along. Regardless, he had no intention of picking one over the other. That wasn't what this was about. Makoto watched Yuji intently, his eyes narrowed, and then he smiled.
あ、そっか。上がったよ、上がった。なんだよ、幼児。本当に白沼の方がいいんだ。つかさ、それってつまり俺の勘違いだったってこと？なんかすっげえバカみたいじゃね？俺。すっげえバカみてえ。
While laughing, he slid the box cutter in and out of its sheath. Phrasing. The gesture filled Yuji with terror. It felt like Makoto was falling apart right before his eyes. Still, he couldn't let his fear win. He wanted Makoto to know how he truly felt.
違う。
The blade stopped moving.
お前も白沼も選ばない。大体選ぶってなんだよ。なんで選ぶ必要があるんだよ。
That's right, threesome. The smile vanished from Makoto's face.
だってさ、おかしいんだよ。白沼がお前に何したよ。何にもしてねえだろ。昼休みも二人で教室からいなくなるし、しかもその前に二人で話してたよな。白沼と話してる時の幼児ってなんか違うんだよ。自分では気づいてないかもしれないけど。でさ、俺気づいたんだ。幼児と白沼はなんか似てるって。幼児とかそういうのじゃなくてさ。
In contrast to his detached tone, his gaze was tinged with sadness.
俺さ、ずっと幼児のこと心配で力になろうと思ってさ。友達だし、こういう時こそ頼ってほしいって思ってたんだよ。でもお前何も話してくれねえじゃん。
Without breaking eye contact, Makoto tilted his head up.
なんで俺はこんなに思ってるのに幼児はこっちに来てくれないんだろうって思ってさ。なんか俺って何なのかなって思って。なあ幼児、俺たちって何なの？友達なの？
Gonna be honest, probably not anymore. Friends? Yuji wasn't sure. He knew that he hadn't been considerate of Makoto's feelings. Could he really call himself Makoto's friend? No, right now you're just his victim. He just didn't have an answer. Hostage, maybe?
なんだよ、友達ですらないって。そっか、やっぱり全部俺の勘違いだったってことか。あっはっは、だぜ。俺死んだ方がいいんじゃねえの？はっはっはっは。
Makoto laughed and extended the cutter, eyes wide.
誠、
暴れたら速攻刺す。もうここまで来ちゃったらさ、戻れねえよ。後戻りとか無理。俺とお前の関係も俺自身も。だからさ、ごめんな。俺もう終わらせるわ。
Damn it! Makoto's face crumpled, tears in his eyes. He whipped the box cutter high into the air. Yuji squeezed his eyes shut and turned away. Shiranuma. The name rang out in his mind. It sounded like a cry for help. He imagined Tetsuo's steely gaze. Just then, he heard the door slide open, followed by rapid footsteps. Someone grabbed Makoto from behind. Yuji pushed himself away, then turned, his eyes widened. It was Tetsuo. Makoto swung the box cutter wildly, trying to free himself from Tetsuo's grip. The momentum pitched them both sideways, and they fell to the floor. The box cutter slipped from Makoto's hand and slid away with a loud clatter.
白沼。
Tetsuo glanced at Yuji, clasping one hand with the other. Blood dripped from his fingertips. He must have been cut in the struggle.
なんだよ。なんでお前が来るんだよ。
Makoto was on his hands and knees, growling in frustration.
お前さえいなきゃ全部うまくいってたはずなのに、なんで くそなんで思い通りにならないんだよ今までこんなことなかったのになんでなんだよ
'Cause you're fucking crazy. Then sheer misery in his voice gave Yuji pause. It was almost like he'd never experienced failure before. But the more Yuji thought about it, the more it made sense. Makoto was happy. He had lots of friends, and his parents were still alive. If this was really the first time he ever failed to get what he wanted, it probably hurt like hell. Truth be told, Yuji envied him. He'd hardly ever gotten anything he wanted out in life. Still, it hurt to see Makoto in such pain. Dude, you did this one yourself! Makoto screamed at the top of his lungs, then staggered to his feet and dashed out of the chemistry lab. His footsteps echoed loudly down the hallway. Then he was gone, and silence fell at last. Struggling to process what had just happened, Yuji turned to Tetsuo. He just couldn't believe it was real.
なんで白沼がここに
Tetsuo met Yuji's gaze. He seemed much the same as always. He hadn't even broken a sweat.
教室にいねえから探してた。勉強見るって話だったし。
Now he remembered he agreed to go to Tetsuo's house after school. But Makoto had locked the door to the chemistry lab.
鍵は
Broke the door.
一回来てしまってたから、職員室でスペアキー借りた。
If Tetsuo had decided to go home without him at that point, there was no telling what would have happened. Tetsuo might have just saved his life. It was bizarre. Back when Makoto had been about to stab him, Tetsuo's face had flashed through his mind, and then moments later he'd showed up for real. It was like something out of a movie, too convenient to be a coincidence. For now, however, Yuji was just grateful to be alive. He heaved a sigh of relief, and then he remembered the cut on his hand, which promptly began to twinge. A dark red line ran from the base of his thumb to his wrist. It was still bleeding, but the cut didn't look too serious. Speaking of which, wasn't Tetsuo bleeding too? Yuji glanced at him. Sure enough, a deep scarlet gash was etched into the back of his... Wait. Was Tetsuo cut? Was Tetsuo's cut fading? It had been a trick of the light. And yet, as he stared at it in disbelief, the wound continued to shrink until it was barely noticeable. Yuji didn't even realize he had been staring until Tetsuo moved, hit his hand behind his back. Yuji quickly averted his gaze, but the gears were already turning in his head. Something about the sight was familiar. Of his many fuzzy childhood memories, there was one thing he remembered clearly. His father had always been quick to recover from injuries. Even when he cut himself bad, he'd simply slap a band-aid on it and the next day it would be gone. Back then, Yuji had never questioned it. He simply assumed that this was how grown-ups' bodies worked. But now he knew better. This was wrong. Or was it just a really rare condition?
怪我は
Tetsuo's voice brought him back with a start.
手を少し
保健室寄っとけよ。
白沼は
別にいい。
Tetsuo strode off toward the door. Yuji followed, grabbing his book bag off the floor. As he neared the door, his foot hit something. The box cutter. Instantly, he recalled Makoto's face, that heart-wrenching expression between crying and laughter. With a heavy heart, Yuji put the box cutter in his bag. Somehow he couldn't leave it lying there. His body ached all over. He'd put up quite a fight earlier, so he guessed he had a few bruises he didn't know about yet. Why won't things just go my way? Makoto's scream replayed in his mind, and he remembered his sister's advice. I think it's important you try to reach out. No, we're done with that. Maybe if he tried to reach out just a little harder, this would not have happened. Now it was too late. I don't know if reaching out would have done anything. After Tetsuo retrieved his book bag from the classroom, they headed to the nurse's office to get Yuji treated. Well, that's where we're going to leave it, actually. Oop, no, we're not. There we go. So, guys, thank you for joining me for another episode. So, Makoto is nuts and a little mad that he's not getting his way. So, he's acting like a little bit of an insane spoiled brat. So, things are really getting darker and darker in the game. I hope you're all enjoying it, and please check out our new items in the shop. We even have some fun little body pillows. And don't forget to check out all the links in the description and be really awesome. Thank you all for your support and your continued enjoyment of the series. And I'll see you guys next time. Lily out. Bye.